We were having dinner with my wife's friends when one of them asked how we first met. She smiled and said, he pretty much begged me to go out with him. Just look at him. Average, desperate, and lucky I was bored. Everyone laughed. I didn't. Then she kept talking. Honestly, I'm still with him because I don't have time to teach someone better looking how to act. Her best friend said, wow. My wife looked straight at me and added, let's be honest, no one else would even want him. I stood up, grabbed my drink, and dumped it over her head. I walked out without saying a single word. That all happened last night. Later, I made a choice she never expected. Now today, my phone won't stop buzzing with her messages, one after another. You know that moment when your whole world tips sideways and you realize everything you thought was solid is actually built on sand? For me, it happened over a fancy dinner, watching my wife laugh as she publicly shredded me into pieces. But what came next? What she never saw coming was the quiet, ice-cold decision I made right there at that table, a decision that would unravel her entire life. It was just another one of Malia's fancy dinners. We were at this trendy spot she loved, velvet banquettes, plates that looked like abstract art, and servers who called everyone babe. Honestly, it wasn't my scene. Never had been. But Malia loved it, and I showed up. That was always my role, right? The quiet, present, supportive background husband. She liked me that way. She never said it directly, but it was in every dismissive smile, every hand wave when I tried to speak up around her friends. Malia sat across from me, glowing under the ambient lights, her hand curled around a stemless wine glass. Zara, her best friend, was to her right, her voice already dominating the table like a trumpet in a jazz band, brash, booming, impossible to ignore. Priya, with her smug little smirk, was on Malia's left. I was next to Zara, mostly because it was the only seat left. I'd learned long ago not to fight the seating arrangements. My job was to smile, nod, maybe laugh in the right places. Somewhere between the calamari and the second round of drinks, Priya leaned in. Her head tilted, feigning curiosity, like she didn't already know the answer. So, she said, how did you two meet? It was a harmless question. The kind of icebreaker I usually love to answer because, honestly, our real story was pretty sweet. But before I could even open my mouth, Malia cut in. She smirked. Not a warm, loving smirk. The kind of smirk people use right before they humiliate someone. He basically begged me to date him, she said, laughing like it was some hilarious inside joke. Zara immediately burst out, roaring with laughter. Priya grinned, already hooked. I just sat there, still, watching her. Malia didn't stop. Look at him, she continued, gesturing toward me with her wine glass like I was part of the decor. Desperate. Average. Lucky I was bored, right? Zara cackled again, slapping the table. Girl, stop. But she didn't mean it. They never meant it. I forced a smile. Not because I found it funny, but because that's what I'd trained myself to do in moments like these. Pretend, shrink. But Malia still wasn't done. Honestly, she said, setting her glass down, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, I'm only still with him because I don't have time to train someone hotter. That got them howling. The whole table shook with their laughter while I sat there, barely touching my drink, wondering at what point in our marriage this had become okay. I stared down at my plate, but even the food felt embarrassed. Something inside me coiled. Not exploding. Just coiling. Quietly. Tightly. She didn't notice. Or maybe she just didn't care. Then came the final blow. The one she knew would truly land. Let's be real, Malia said, her voice dripping with mock sincerity. No one else wants him. Those words just sat there on the table. Like a slap. Not loud, not physical, but unmistakable. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. I looked up at her, really looked, and saw the woman I married through a lens I hadn't used before. There was a time I would have chalked it up to her being playful, told myself she was just teasing. But not anymore. Not tonight. I reached for my glass. Calm. Smooth. No theatrics. No warning. I tilted it, and the drink, cranberry and soda, her favorite because it wouldn't stain her teeth, poured out in a clean, steady stream. Right over her hair. The table went dead silent. The liquid soaked into her curls, ran down the side of her face, and dripped onto her blouse. Zara's jaw dropped. Priya gasped. Malia didn't move at first. Just sat there, disbelief plastered on her face, frozen mid-laugh. I stood up, pulled a few folded bills from my wallet, placed them under the lip of my untouched plate, and tucked my chair back in with care. I didn't say a word. I didn't look back. I just walked out through the murmurs and gasps of nearby diners. I didn't stomp. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even hesitate. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. Crisp. Clean. Untouched by her perfume or their noise. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. There was no regret, no panic, just a strange, almost welcome clarity. A clean line drawn. I wasn't angry. I was done pretending. The parking lot lights flickered. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air. My phone pulsed in my pocket, like it was alive. I ignored it, let it vibrate once, then twice. I wanted to feel that moment, the silence after the storm, the distance between her voice and my ears. But my phone wouldn't quit. Her name, Malia, lit up the screen. The first message, what the hell? Seconds later, come back. Then, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. I didn't respond. Just slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat there with the engine off. The messages kept rolling in. Angry, sharp, confused. She was scrambling to understand what had happened, but not why it had happened. That distinction mattered. I wasn't trying to prove a point with the drink. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I did it because, for once, I wasn't going to cushion her blow with my silence. I wasn't going to swallow her public humiliation like a good little background husband. She'd always assumed I wouldn't bite back. She was wrong. Eventually, I started the engine and drove home. Our house was dark. I parked on the street. I didn't want the porch light announcing my return. I slipped inside, left the lights off. My footsteps echoed a little louder than normal against the hardwood. Or maybe that was just my awareness waking up. Everything felt sharper, like my senses had been on mute for years, and suddenly someone had turned the volume up. I dropped my keys on the hallway table and walked straight to the den, collapsing onto the pull-out couch. Not because she'd kicked me out. Not because of some passive-aggressive argument. But because I needed distance. Not just from her. From myself. From the man I'd let her turn me into. The husband who laughed at his own belittling, who stayed silent while she collected applause at his expense. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, letting the quiet wrap around me. It was the most peace I'd felt in months. At 4:17 a.m., my phone buzzed again. It was her. This time, the message was different. No anger, no scolding. Just 3 words, all caps, like a scream trying to dress up as a question. What did you do? I stared at it. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't apologize. She didn't even ask why. Just panic, rooted not in loss, but in control slipping from her fingers. She wasn't scared of losing me. She was scared of not understanding what I was doing. That was her power. Knowing how I moved, predicting my next step. But this time, I'd taken a step she didn't see coming. And that terrified her. By sunrise, there were 18 more messages. A barrage of shifting tones. Some pleading, please just talk to me. Others attempted humor, okay, you made your point. A few were cruel again. I read them all. None of them reached me. Not really. I was too far past the point of wanting to be understood. I brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen. No music. No news. I just sat at the table, staring at the wall, thinking. Not plotting, not daydreaming. Just processing. My thoughts were slow, deliberate. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I had to make room for someone else's expectations before I could hear my own. Around noon, I heard the knock. Soft, but not hesitant. The kind of knock that says, I already know I'm not welcome, but I'm here anyway. I didn't rush. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it in the drying rack. Then I walked to the front door, unlatched the bolt, and opened it. Malia stood there, holding her phone like a shield. She looked tired, but not messy. Her hair was up, clothes neat, but her eyes were wide. Like someone whose foundation was cracking. She looked at me like I was the one who had changed the story halfway through the script, and now she didn't recognize her lines. She opened her mouth to speak, but I beat her to it. Don't, I said quietly. Not yet. And I closed the door. The click of the latch was soft. Final. I stood there for a second, hands still on the knob. Not because I regretted it, but because I felt the weight of that choice settle into my bones. Closing the door on someone who had taken up so much of your life doesn't feel like slamming it on a chapter. It feels like locking away a version of yourself. The one you tolerated. The one who made excuses for peace. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wouldn't be. I walked back to the kitchen, bare feet cold against the tile, and pulled out a notebook. Not a digital one. Paper. Ink. Something real. Something tactile. I needed to see the truth spelled out in front of me. Something about the flick of the pen and the sound of it scratching across the page grounded me. I wrote the date at the top, underlined it. Then sat in silence before drawing the first line. What's mine? I started with the obvious. The den couch, a gift from my uncle. My tools in the garage. The desktop I built during lockdown. My grandfather's watch. The lease was in both our names, but I'd paid the deposit. I made a list of every item I'd either bought outright or brought into this marriage. My gym membership, the car registered to me, the insurance, the electric, the Wi-Fi account. Then I started tallying. But before I got to the numbers, I paused. This wasn't just about property. It wasn't about what I could legally take. That was surface. What I really needed was a different kind of inventory. Not of things, but of truths. So, I made a second list, titled with shaky but deliberate handwriting, What Was Real? I started slow. The little things came first. The offhand comments she made in front of her friends that she called jokes. The time she rolled her eyes at my boss during a work dinner when I talked about a promotion. The night she sighed when I asked for affection. The arguments that somehow always ended with me apologizing. I had trained myself to minimize those moments. To translate her cruelty into sarcasm, her dismissiveness into just being tired. But this time, I listed them all without spin. I remembered the weekend she canceled our anniversary plans because Zara had a birthday brunch. The week she left me to care for her sick father alone while she went to a spa getaway. The way she only introduced me as her husband when she wanted to make someone jealous. Every apology I'd made on her behalf to strangers, family, waiters, friends. I wrote them down. Then I started a third column, exit moves. This one was clean. Objective. I was good with systems. Always had been. I pulled out my laptop, opened a spreadsheet. Joint accounts. Bank balances. Direct debits. Her subscriptions. My paycheck. I traced everything. Mapped out passwords. Reset the ones I could. I looked up our lease agreement, highlighted the early termination clause. Listed every co-signed account. Calculated the cost of separating them. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just steps. I wasn't building an escape. I was drafting a transition plan. The thing is, when people think about the end of a relationship, they picture shouting. Slammed doors. Packed bags. Clothes on the lawn. But sometimes, endings are quiet. Administrative. They look like a man printing a spreadsheet at 2:38 p.m. on a Tuesday. They look like silence instead of rage. A pin clicking shut instead of a voice raised. That was the kind of ending I wanted. Deliberate. Clean. Undeniable. By evening, I had a folder on my desktop labeled Next. Inside were subfolders, finances, housing options, legal. I wasn't playing games. I wasn't bluffing. I didn't want to hurt her. I just didn't want to keep living inside a relationship where I was the punchline to someone else's joke. The irony? She hadn't even tried to apologize properly. She hadn't called, hadn't knocked again. Just texted with varying levels of annoyance, confusion, and dismissal. Maybe she thought I was sulking. That I'd come around. But this wasn't silence. This was clarity. This was the sound of boundaries being drawn. I printed the spreadsheet. Held the warm paper in my hands. It was oddly satisfying, watching the data materialize like proof of my sanity. I had stayed so long because I convinced myself things would change, because I thought if I loved her hard enough, she'd stop using me as a mirror she could mock. But I'd been wrong. The change had to come for me, not her. I placed the printed list into a drawer and turned off the printer. The hum quieted, leaving only the ticking of the wall clock. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look sad. I didn't look angry. I just looked there. Present. Aware. A man slowly reclaiming the space he'd forfeited inch by inch over the years. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I was doing. And more importantly, why. The air inside the closet felt different that day. Like it knew something was about to change. I stood there, staring at the line where her clothes ended and mine began. Our lives used to overlap in every corner. His and hers drawers. Shared hangers. Cologne beside perfume. But standing there now, it all looked like evidence. Proof of a partnership I'd been dragging forward on my own. I reached for my suitcase first. One of those old hardshell ones we used for weekend trips. The kind we never used anymore because her idea of getting away meant luxury spas. I hadn't traveled in almost a year. But I dusted it off, clicked it open, and started packing. Not everything. Just what I needed. Enough for the next few weeks with my dignity intact. Work clothes. Gym shirts. My favorite sweater. I slid them in slowly, folding everything with intention, not urgency. This wasn't a getaway. This was a quiet exodus. My work laptop went into my backpack. So did the folders from the office, the receipts I'd been saving for tax season, and a small leather-bound notebook I'd once used to plan a future with her. I looked at that notebook for a second, its spine soft from use, the corners frayed. Then I dropped it in without opening it. I didn't need to read our old dreams to know they no longer applied. I moved through the house without noise. Without stomping. Without throwing accusations at the walls. This wasn't a scene. It was a decision. I picked up the watch my grandfather gave me when I got my first job. She never liked how old it looked. Said it didn't match the image we were building. But it matched me. And that was enough. I fastened it around my wrist like a small promise to myself. On the bathroom counter, I left the wedding ring. I didn't toss it or place it in a box. I didn't hide it in a drawer. I set it down carefully right beside the hand soap, where she'd be sure to see it. A quiet punctuation mark. The kind that didn't need a dramatic exit line. Just truth. I'd written the letter earlier that morning. It was short. Less than a paragraph. I didn't labor over it, didn't agonize about the wording. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. Not an apology, not a justification. Just facts. I folded the paper in half and placed it on the bed, right above the pillows. It read, "You made a public choice. I made a private one. Goodbye." No signature. She didn't need one. She'd know. It was nearly 6 when I finished. The golden hour light spilled into the living room, casting soft shadows. I walked through it one last time, running my fingers along the edge of the dining table, the one we bought after our honeymoon, thinking we'd host people, build a home full of laughter. We hosted twice. After that, she said it was too much effort. I unplugged my phone from the charger, grabbed my keys, and paused at the door. Not out of hesitation, just reflection. This had been my life for 5 years. The walls had heard me at my best and worst. They'd watched me become the version of myself that bowed to her every opinion, swallowed every insult for the sake of peace. But peace never came. Only smaller and smaller pieces of myself, chipped away until I wasn't sure what was left. Now I knew. I was the man who walked away when staying meant losing himself. I stepped outside. The street was calm. I slid my suitcase into the trunk, closed it gently, and got behind the wheel. I didn't look back at the house. Not because I wanted to be cold, but because I didn't need one last glance to validate my choice. I'd already said everything that mattered. I drove with the windows down. Not fast. Not aimlessly. I had a place in mind. A friend had offered me their spare room weeks ago, noticing I'd been pulling away from things, asking strange questions about lease transfers. I told them I was just planning ahead. They nodded, said, "Let me know when ahead turns into now. Tonight was that moment. By the time I arrived, the sun had fully dipped. My friend greeted me with a nod and a quiet hug. No questions, no judgment. Just space. That was all I wanted. An hour later, while unpacking, my phone lit up again. Missed calls. Then messages. She'd gotten home. She'd found the ring. The letter. The silence. I didn't open any of them, but I saw the preview bubbles. "Are you serious? This isn't funny. Then talk to me, please." I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The night moved on, and for the first time in years, so did I. I woke up to silence and sunlight. A strange combination. Not the tense silence of waiting for an apology or a door slam. No, this was the real kind. The kind that fills a space with peace, not pressure. I blinked against the light set up. The guest bed was firmer than I was used to, but I didn't care. I'd slept through the night. No tossing, no flinching. Just rest. Full, uninterrupted rest. That alone told me I'd made the right decision. By the time I poured my coffee and settled in front of my laptop, her group chat had already erupted. I hadn't been in that group, obviously, but people talk. Screenshots fly. Even Malia's inner circle had cracks, and someone somewhere decided I had the right to see what was unfolding. The first message came from Priya. Timestamped 8:03 a.m. "Where's your husband?" People are talking. I sat back, watching the words glow. No venom, no judgment, just curiosity. But it was enough to shake Malia. I knew her well enough to imagine the panic crawling up her spine when she realized she wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. Zara replied 5 minutes later, trying to lighten the mood the only way she knew how. "Girl, you broke him. What did you do?" That one made me chuckle. Not because it was funny, but because it was the kind of joke they used to make about me without hesitation. I was the harmless one. The pushover. The man who'd been reshaped into a background prop in his own marriage. A character they could use for their punchlines and then forget existed. Then someone, still not sure who, leaked the full dinner story. Word for word. How it came out, I don't know. Maybe a nearby diner posted something. Maybe one of her friends had enough decency left to realize this time she'd crossed a line. But there it was, floating through mutual friends' feeds like wildfire. No video, just a recounting. But it was vivid. Real enough to paint the scene with brutal clarity. People stopped laughing. The shift was immediate. Reactions started surfacing like oil on water. Some were shocked. Others defended her at first. She's always been playful. It was a joke. But the responses that stuck were the quiet ones. Wait, he poured the drink and didn't say a word? That was the detail that landed hardest. Not the insult, not even the cruelty, but my silence. My calm. Someone wrote, "I'd leave too." Another added, "That's not a joke. That's disrespect." She tried to spin it, of course. Malia never let a narrative run without inserting her own version first. She dropped a few texts into the chat, trying to act confused. "He's just sensitive," she typed. "You all know how he gets." No apology. No accountability. Just the usual cocktail of deflection and insult. Then came the follow-up, "He's insecure. He hates being around confident women." That's when it really started to fall apart. Because for the first time, her audience wasn't clapping. Zara didn't respond. Neither did Priya, at least not right away. The typing indicator popped up a few times, then disappeared. It's funny how quickly loyalty dissolves when the crowd senses a shift in momentum. They had all built her up. Her jokes, her image, her spotlight. But the thing about building someone up is the moment they look smaller than expected, the structure starts to crack. The applause fades. The spotlight moves. Screenshots of her attempts to justify the dinner circulated fast. Someone sent one to me, captioned with, "This isn't sitting right." And that's when I realized this wasn't just my break from her. This was her break from the version of herself she performed for others. The polished, sharp-tongued queen of savage humor. The one who used people like mirrors and expected them to reflect only what she curated. That version was now exposed. Her own circle was distancing themselves. Not because they loved me. Most barely tolerated me. But because silence is contagious, and I hadn't said a single word. No statement. No clapback post. No dramatic thread on social media. Just quiet. And the absence of noise told the whole story better than anything else could have. I spent most of that day working remotely, catching up on projects, ignoring the buzz of messages coming in. She texted again late in the afternoon. "Why are you doing this?" It was the first one in a while that didn't feel performative. It was the first that maybe had a thread of real fear tangled in it. But I didn't respond. Because somewhere between the chat unraveling and her excuses turning to ash, I realized something I should have known a long time ago. I wasn't the problem. My sensitivity wasn't the issue. My silence wasn't weakness. It was grace. It was restraint. It was the exact kind of power she'd never understood because she'd never needed to hold her tongue or protect someone's dignity before. She used sharpness to feel strong. I used distance to regain mine. That night, I stood in the small kitchen of my borrowed apartment and made dinner. Simple stuff. Nothing fancy. Just a man feeding himself, choosing peace over performance. My phone stayed on silent. Not out of pettiness, but because the only voice I needed to hear was my own. And for once, it was loud and clear. The call came in while I was brushing my teeth. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'd been ignoring calls all day, mostly unknown numbers, a few old friends trying to act like they weren't choosing sides. But when I glanced down and saw her name, Diane, I froze. Malia's mother. The woman who had always looked at me like I was some experiment her daughter forgot to finish. I hadn't heard her voice in almost 6 months. Even during holidays, she called Malia directly. Sent group gifts with only Malia's name on the tag. She was never overly cruel, but she had a way of making you feel like a stand-in, like I was the generic brand of son-in-law she hadn't ordered. I stared at the phone, foamy toothpaste still in my mouth. The brush paused mid-motion. I should have let it ring. Should have deleted her number years ago. But something about it, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, made me swipe to answer. "Hello." There was a pause. Static. Then her voice, tight and clipped. "I didn't think you'd pick up." I leaned against the bathroom counter, toothbrush still in hand. Neither did I. She cleared her throat, like she was switching into formal mode, trying to find footing. "You made your point," she said. No greeting. No warmth. Just right to it. "But don't throw away a marriage over one joke." I spit into the sink, rinsed, wiped my face. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lash out. I just stood there, staring at my reflection. "She didn't throw a joke," I said. She lit a match. Another pause. This one longer. I imagined her standing in her kitchen, probably pacing with a wine glass, the way she used to when we visited. She always wore control like perfume. Heavy. Intentional. "So, this is serious?" she asked. That's what did it for me. The slight disbelief tucked behind her words, like she couldn't imagine a version of events where I wasn't overreacting, where Malia wasn't the misunderstood one. Diane had spent years shaping her daughter into a woman who could twist perception into power. This was just another moment for her to reel it all back in. I breathed in. Let the silence settle. "I'm not angry," I said finally. "I'm just done." The line went quiet again. I didn't fill it. I let her sit in it. Eventually, she sighed. Not a tired sigh. An offended one. "So, you're leaving over a dinner comment?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm leaving over a marriage that made me feel like I didn't matter." That comment was just the receipt. She didn't respond. I heard the sound of a glass being set down. Then the line disconnected. She hung up. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the dim reflection in the mirror. Not feeling triumphant, not smug. Just steady. Like each time I held a boundary, a brick got laid beneath my feet. A stronger foundation. One built for me and no one else. I didn't need her to agree. I didn't need her to understand. But I knew one thing with certainty. She'd tell Malia. And that would set off the next storm. Sure enough, 2 hours later, my phone started buzzing again. Malia's number. I didn't answer. Then the text came. "Did you seriously talk to my mother?" Followed by, "She's freaking out. Why would you drag her into this?" And finally, the one that made me laugh out loud in the quiet apartment. "You're being so dramatic." Dramatic. That was her word for anything she didn't want to deal with. My hurt? Dramatic. My silence? Dramatic. Me not being available to carry the weight of her ego every time she stumbled? Dramatic. It was like the word dramatic had become a defense shield. Say it enough times and maybe the other person will start questioning themselves. But not this time. That night, I went for a walk. No destination. Just steps. One after another, under streetlights and late-night quiet. When I got back, I had another voicemail. I debated playing it, but I knew her voice too well to resist. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter as I made tea. Her voice was softer this time. I talked to my mom. I don't know what you told her, but she's acting like I cheated on you or something. This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. A pause, then a sigh. Please don't do something we can't take back. We. She still thought we were a we. That's what hit me. Not the lack of apology. Not even the gaslighting. Just that word. She hadn't noticed that I'd already left the concept of we behind days ago. When I packed my bag, when I laid down the ring, when I closed the door, there was no we. There was her and there was me. And now, finally, there was space in between. I didn't look up when she walked into my office. I didn't need to. I knew it was her the second the door opened and the familiar perfume hit the air, sandalwood and citrus, the one she always oversprayed before parties. I had just opened a spreadsheet when I caught the sudden silence in the reception area. That kind of silence only happens when someone walks in that doesn't belong. I heard my assistant's voice falter, then a faint. He's with someone right now, but Malia's heels clicked forward anyway. I looked up when the door creaked open. She was standing there in a navy blue dress. Hair slicked into a bun, like she was heading into court or church. The irony was thick. Her eyes were glassy, red around the edges. She'd cried on the way over, but made sure her makeup stayed perfect. Her lip gloss shimmered. I watched her close the door gently behind her and exhale, like she was bracing herself. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't say no. Didn't say yes either. I just motioned to the small lounge room off to the side, 2 armchairs, a faux ficus, a coffee table no one ever used. She walked in like she'd been there 100 times, because she had. All those nights she'd stopped by to support me, just to spend the entire time scrolling through her phone and complaining about how boring the office looked. She sat down, crossed her legs, folded her hands in her lap. I stayed standing for a second longer, watching her. She looked small. Not physically, but smaller than the version of herself she performed for the world. She wasn't playing to an audience now. Just me. She started crying before she even spoke. I watched her mouth quiver, then twist, as the words choked their way out. I didn't mean it. I waited. You know I didn't mean it. Her voice cracked. It was just a joke. That's how I am. You've always known that. She looked up at me like she expected me to reach for her hand or wipe a tear or say something like, I know. It's okay. But I didn't. I sat down across from her and folded my arms. You know what hurts? I said finally. Not that you said it. But that you said it with people watching. Like I was nothing. Like I was a safe target you could dress up in mockery. She blinked fast. It wasn't like that. Yes, it was. I kept my tone level. Calm. Not cruel. It was exactly like that. She wiped her face and leaned forward. So, you're ruining your life over a dinner? I stared at her. That sentence told me everything. No, I said. I'm walking away from a pattern. That dinner was just the receipt. She laughed bitterly. You think you're the only one who's been unhappy? I never said I wasn't flawed, I replied. But I never humiliated you. I never put you down to win applause. She stood up then, pacing in the tiny space between the chairs like a bird that couldn't figure out where the glass ended and the open air began. I've been under pressure, okay? My job's been insane. Zara's wedding planning has been nonstop. My mom's been on my back about everything. I said something stupid. Why are you blowing it up like this? Because I finally realized that being with you costs me more than it feeds me, I said quietly. And I'm done bankrupting myself emotionally just to keep you satisfied. She stopped walking. Turned slowly. You're really doing this. I am. She stared at me, breathing heavily like she'd run a race and hadn't won. Do you want me to beg? She asked, voice low. No. Her face collapsed for a second. Why are you being so cold? I shook my head. This isn't cold. This is me finally warm with my own honesty. We stood there in silence, her mascara holding on for dear life. She looked like she wanted to scream, but something told her it wouldn't land the way it used to. She had always relied on emotional chaos to bring things back to center. Say something outrageous, cry just enough, then reset the power dynamic. But I wasn't giving her the script she was used to. This wasn't a scene she could edit. She sat down again, this time slower, her voice smaller. Do you still love me? I didn't rush to answer. I don't know, I said. I loved you so long that I stopped asking what I needed in return. I think I confused love with loyalty. She wiped under her eyes. And you don't think I loved you? I shrugged. Maybe you did. But only when it served you. Only when it looked good on a story post. That one hit. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She stood up once more, gathering her bag with trembling fingers. So, this is it. I already told you goodbye, I said. You just hadn't heard it yet. She stared at me, and I could see it, how she wanted to reach for one last thread of control, one last insult, one last spin. But she didn't. She just nodded once, lips tight, and walked out the door. No storm, no final plea. Just the soft click of the door behind her. And peace. It was close to midnight when I got the voice note from Zara. I had just finished clearing out a drawer in the apartment, sorting through receipts and things I should have thrown away months ago. The night was still. That kind of stillness that makes you check your phone just to remind yourself that you still exist in someone's world. I wasn't expecting anything. Not from anyone connected to Malia. Definitely not from Zara, the woman who laughed the loudest at that dinner. But there it was, her name glowing on my screen, followed by a voice note just under a minute long. I stared at it for a while before pressing play. Her voice came through soft, quieter than I'd ever heard her. Hey, I didn't say anything at dinner because I didn't know how. But that was messed up. You didn't deserve it. I've been thinking about it since. I should have said something then. I'm sorry. A breath, a pause. Whatever you decide to do, I get it. I sat on the edge of the bed listening to it again. Then once more. Not because I needed her validation, but because for the first time, someone in Malia's world admitted I wasn't crazy. That moment mattered more than I expected. Then, 20 minutes later, the real hit came. A screenshot from Priya. No preamble, no explanation. Just a message forwarded directly from the group chat. Malia, he's too sensitive. I should have married someone hotter with thicker skin. I didn't move for a long time. I read the words, then I read them again. They didn't sting like a fresh wound. No, they confirmed everything I already knew. Everything I'd spent the last few weeks waking up to. It wasn't just the dinner. It wasn't even the years of casual disrespect. It was this. The way she could throw me to the wolves when no one else was watching and still expect me to stand beside her like a shield. That's when I opened my laptop and started writing the email. Subject line, consultation request, separation filing. No emotion. No flair. Just a simple request for my lawyer to begin the paperwork. I didn't slam the keyboard. I didn't write a dramatic message. I attached the spreadsheet I'd built, listed the shared assets, and included my preferred terms. I knew what I wanted now, freedom. Not revenge, just space between who I was with her and who I needed to become. I hit send. It was done. There was a strange calm that settled over me after that. Like my nervous system finally believed me when I said I wouldn't be stepping back into that burning house. My silence, until now, had been a shield. But this time, it was a sword. A quiet, steady strike that said, no more. I set the phone down, not bothering to reply to Zara or Priya. There was nothing to say. Their words weren't bridges. They were overdue acknowledgments. I didn't need allies. I needed distance. Malia didn't text again that night. Maybe she sensed something had shifted. Maybe she was too busy rewriting the story for whoever would listen. That was her thing, narrative control. She could humiliate me in public, then cry into her cocktail, and say I was too soft to handle a strong woman. But even the people who clapped for her were starting to look confused. That much was obvious now. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight on my face, and for once, it didn't feel invasive. It felt like something new. A signal. I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth slowly, thinking about how many years I'd spent trying to fix the way she saw me instead of just fixing the way I saw myself. My inbox pinged just after 10. A reply from the lawyer. Simple acknowledgement, will proceed. Drafts coming shortly. There was no turning back now. No negotiating dignity. Later that day, I listened to Zara's voice note one last time. Then I saved it. Not as a keepsake, but as a timestamp. The moment someone who once laughed at me admitted I'd been right to leave. It wasn't a badge of honor, just proof that silence sometimes is louder than any speech. I stepped outside into the cool breeze, my phone still in my pocket, unread messages still sitting there like bait. Malia was probably still trying to find a version of the story that made her look like the victim. But the thing about stories is, eventually the truth leaks. Screenshots don't lie, and people remember silence, especially the kind that walks away calmly after years of being dismissed. By nightfall, I'd cleaned out 2 more boxes from the storage unit. I packed only what I needed. Only what still felt like mine. Everything else could rot with the old version of me. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want applause. I just wanted peace that didn't come with conditions. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission to take it. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Not a text, not a call, not even another one of her dramatized voice notes. Just a courier envelope with her name written in the top left corner. Not in her handwriting, but typed. Formal. Detached. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Malia had finally received the separation papers. I stared at the envelope on the kitchen table for a while, sipping my coffee slowly. Not because I was nervous, just because I knew this was the moment everything became real to her. She hadn't believed I'd go through with it. Maybe she thought this was just another one of our cool downs. A few nights apart. Some cold shoulders. Then a reconciliation framed with forced laughter and new rules that only applied to me. But this wasn't that. This was final. She texted that afternoon. Just 3 words, "You're serious?" I didn't reply. What was there to say? My silence had done more in the past 2 weeks than my voice had managed in the past 5 years. Anything I said now would be bending backward into the narrative she was still trying to salvage. And I had no interest in helping her rebuild the fantasy. She followed it up with another, "So this is how you handle conflict?" Funny, that word, conflict. Like what happened at dinner was just a small difference in communication style. Like I'd misheard her calling me desperate and unwanted. Like I was being immature for not wanting to be the willing butt of her jokes anymore. I put my phone face down and left it there. I had work to do, groceries to get, and peace to protect. That evening, she started posting. I don't know if it was for me or for her followers or just for her own delusion. But she started with a vague story slides. A black screen with white text. Some people just can't handle a strong woman. Then another. Imagine walking away because your ego is louder than your heart. The usual hashtags, quotes, half-truths dressed as empowerment. Then came the comments. At first, they rolled in the way they always did. Heart emojis. So true, replies. Friends trying to hype her up. But this time, they didn't all stay loyal. Something had shifted. Screenshots were being passed around. Her words from the group chat. The dinner story. The voice note from Zara that somehow made it into the hands of one of their mutual friends. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. One person commented, "Wait, is this about what happened at dinner?" Another wrote, "Didn't you call him average and say no one else wanted him?" She tried to delete a few, but they multiplied. People love a scandal until they realize they're clapping for a villain. Then came the fallout. Her boss, yes, the same one she constantly bragged about impressing, apparently caught wind of the whole thing. Someone forwarded the screenshots to HR, and though it didn't lead to formal action, it shifted the air around her. The glow dimmed. Meetings became colder. Respect retreated. Even her gym trainer, who had trained both of us, asked her flat out one morning what really happened at that dinner. He messaged me later that day, said he didn't want to take sides, but hoped I was doing okay. I told him I was better than okay. I was free. Her friends began peeling off one by one. Zara unfollowed her first, then Priya. I didn't revel in it, but I noticed the empire of influence she'd built, post by filtered post, started to crack. Not because I tore it down, but because she'd built it on my silence. And now that I'd stopped offering it, the scaffolding collapsed. It's strange watching someone lose the stage they thought they'd never step down from. Watching the audience shift in their seats, the applause slowing, the lights dimming. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't satisfaction. It was confirmation. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to campaign. All I had to do was walk away and mean it. I spent that week boxing up the last of my things from the storage unit and finalizing the next phase of my life. Nothing grand. Nothing flashy. Just new passwords, new subscriptions, a bank account with only my name on it. It felt good to open things for myself again. Simple things. A new set of bed sheets. A lamp I actually liked. A mug that didn't come from one of her networking retreats. Somewhere in the middle of that week, she sent one more message. It was long. A paragraph full of soft words, regret, a hint of accountability, but also that usual undertone of manipulation. "I'm sorry for how it made you feel," she wrote. Not, "I'm sorry for what I said." Just enough to bait empathy. Not enough to take responsibility. "I just wish we could talk one more time," she added. I didn't respond. Because the last time we talked, she laughed at my expense. The time before that, she minimized my needs. The time before that, she promised to be better. And I kept showing up. Kept trying. Kept folding my spine into smaller shapes to fit into the life she built for herself. But not this time. This time, my silence wasn't an absence. It was a boundary. And I planned to keep it intact. The apartment was small, but it felt wide enough to breathe in. Just 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen that overlooked a quiet park across the street. There was a bakery 2 blocks down that made strong coffee and called me by name after a week. And the walls didn't hold old echoes. That mattered more than I expected. I didn't need silence alone. I needed silence that wasn't haunted. No sharp tones. No walking on eggshells. Just the sound of keys in the lock and the hum of my own breath. I bought new mugs, one white, one navy. No couple's initials. No his and hers branding. Just plain, simple mine. I picked out new bed sheets too. Gray, soft, unwrinkled. The kind of thing you buy when no one's going to critique the thread count or color choice. I stood in the aisle of the home goods store for almost 15 minutes, just running my hand across textures. Not because I was lost, but because I wasn't rushing anymore. I was choosing again. Without permission. Without compromise. There was no drama in the move. No final confrontation. I didn't leave things unsaid. I didn't check her profile. I didn't wonder how she was spinning the story now. That part of my life had gone quiet. And it wasn't because she stopped trying. It was because I stopped responding. The last message came on a rainy Thursday morning. The sky was gray. The park outside was empty except for two women jogging in matching pink windbreakers. I had just sat down with my coffee when my phone vibrated once. Just once. Her name again. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the notification for a few seconds. Not because I needed time to prepare, but because I already knew. This would be the final attempt. The last string. When I did open it, there it was. A paragraph. Maybe longer than it needed to be. Definitely too late. Please, let's fix this. I'll do better. Just talk to me. I read it twice. She had always been good with timing. Always knew when to send a message that made you question your anger, question your clarity. But not this time. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't angry either. Anger still implies that you're tethered to the other person. But I cut that cord. What was left wasn't hate. It was absence. A calm void where chaos used to live. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," until the third sentence. She used words like "we" again, as if we still existed. She mentioned memories like they were tools. That vacation to Santorini, the night we got snowed in, the way I used to make her tea when she was sick. They were true moments. But moments can't hold up the weight of years. Not when those years were spent slicing someone slowly and calling it flirting. I stared at the message, thumb hovering above the keyboard. I could have responded. Could have said, "I wish you well." Could have offered closure. But here's the thing, no one tells you about closure. You don't owe it to the person who broke you. You give it to yourself. So I left her on read. Not to hurt her. Not to win. But because that silence, that was my final word. And she would hear it louder than any reply. I went for a walk after that. No destination. Just the familiar loop around the park. The breeze was cool, the kind that makes you zip up your jacket and slow your steps just enough to think. I passed the playground where a little boy was pushing his sister on the swing and smiled to myself. I had started to notice things again. That was the real shift. Not the apartment. Not the solo dinners. Not the bed with only one pillow. But the noticing. The way the leaves curled when the wind hit. The scent of rain on pavement. The way peace doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, waiting for you to finally arrive. When I got back, I turned off my phone, placed it in the drawer, brewed another cup of coffee, sat on my small balcony, and watched the world keep turning. There would be more messages. Maybe not from her, but from people who wanted to know what really happened, or those who just couldn't sit still without drama. But I wouldn't be answering. I didn't need to explain why I left any more than I needed to justify why I stayed as long as I did. What mattered was that I left. What mattered was that I came back to myself. It took one sentence at a dinner table to light the fuse. But the explosion didn't destroy me. It cleared the space. And in that space, I could finally build something better.